Hey there, Business for Unicorns podcast listeners. This is Mark, and I'm here to tell you about an awesome free resource on businessforunicorns.com. If you ever find yourself feeling frustrated with your training gym because you know that there are all sorts of things you could work on, but you're not really sure how to prioritize, you don't know what's the most important thing to work on or what order you should be tackling your priorities, well, now is the time to go to businessforunicorns.com, click the button, and fill out our free self-assessment. With the Ultimate Training Gym Owner Report Card, you will gain immediate clarity on just where to be focusing your attention to create more positive impact on your community, to drive more revenue and take home income, and to do it all with less stress and more peace of mind. So go to businessofunicorns.com, click the button, fill out that free self-assessment, and start building a business and life you love today.
Hello, fitness business nerds. Welcome to another episode of Business for Unicorns podcast. And look what we got today. Well, look if you're on YouTube. Listen if you're listening to the podcast. I'm here with Fisher and Pete, all three of us in one glorious podcast. How are you, gents?
Good. It's good when Voltron connects and all the Captain Planet rings come together. Old people to get that reference.
I want to admit that I've never watched our podcast on YouTube.
Wow.
I've watched it while we record it, and that's the closest I've come. But I always listen on Apple Music, I guess it is. So.
Yeah, me too. Which is a great time to remind you, listeners, if you haven't already subscribed and give us a rating on the iTunes or whichever app you listen to the podcast, you should do that because that's something you should do.
Yeah, go do that because we're worth it. All right, friends. Well, today our kind of roundtable topic is about meetings. And specifically what we wanted to kind of just explore, and, as you all know, dear listeners, these conversations, are not planned. We just kind of talk. And what we're going to talk about specifically is how often should you be having meetings, about what, and with whom? Is whom the right use of the word there, or with who? I don't know.
I just reread Elements of Style this past week, and I can't remember.
I should know that. Well, I'm going to stick with whom, but I think that, that's the topic is sometimes we see that our Unicorn Society members and other businesses that we follow are really good at having the right amount of meetings. And when you have the right amount of meetings, a lot of stars align. There's a right amount of communication. There's a right amount of goal alignment. There's a right kind of transmission of values across the company. And then on either end of the spectrum is disaster. You can have way too many meetings that everyone hates. It's a big waste of their time. No one knows what the purpose is. No one knows what they're doing there. And you can be on the other end of the spectrum where you have no damn meetings. So everything feels like a fire. Everything feels like a one-off. Everyone's communicating haphazardly, however they want. And so, while there's a giant spectrum there, we want to be somewhere in a sweet spot. We're having the right amount of meetings at the right times with the right people about the right stuff. And so just big picture, I'll start with you, Fisher. How do you think about checking that box at MFF?
Yeah, so with the people that report to me, most of them meet with me once a week, one-on-one for 45 minutes. We set them as the standard. And that is one of my favorite time management hack because it allows a little bit of buffer when inevitably meetings run a little bit late. And there are some individuals that I meet with maybe every other week or once a month. And some of these are vendors, consultants. Those are the only people that fall into that category, but anybody that I'm directly managing for whom I'm responsible for their performance, we tend to find a weekly meeting is best. And part of the art that you're considering, the spectrum that one must think through is the good news is it's not unlimited, right? Because it's not going to be daily, probably unless you're onboarding. It's probably not going to be twice a week. So at most you'll meet once a week and at absolute least probably once a month if you have any management responsibility for them. And then you get to decide within there how you want to approach that. And if there's one thing I would say for me that I have learned the hard way over the years is that most people more often than not do better with more frequent touch bases rather than less. Now, that's highly individual. And I share this because if you are at all an entrepreneur, you might like a lot of freedom in your calendar. You might like a lot of autonomy to get your job done. And in my experience, I have rarely gotten into trouble with individuals because I was making them meet with me too often. Anytime I have gotten into grief and felt disconnected with people I was working with is because we weren't meeting frequently enough and things drifted away in ways that were not positive.
Yeah, I think it's well said. I think, people always say they want everyone to over communicate, but they rarely build that into their systems,
Yeah.
right? So if you want everyone to over communicate and really everyone be on the same page, you're going to need a few meetings. Yeah. What about you, P? When you think about having the right amount of meetings, what does that mean to you?
Well, I'll start by saying that we didn't meet often enough in our early stages of our operation. And I think part of the reason that we failed to prioritize it was because we were paying primarily an hourly wage. And we ran into that challenging question of, are we paying for meetings when we're scheduling them sometimes taking place, for example, before the staff got together to train? If we knew everybody wanted to train at 10:30 and clients were coming at 12, we'd say, well, let's do a staff meeting 10 to 10:30, which makes a lot of sense. But if someone wasn't planning on training, it's kind of crummy to have them come in, start their workday, that sort of a deal. And we just had this kind of disconnect between what the business's obligation was, and we, for the record, in hindsight, should have always been paying for it. But the dollars aren't always there in the early stages of operations. At this point, we have a standing all hands meeting once weekly. We budget 45 minutes for it. It's usually about 30 minutes of material that we plan to cover. And it's kind of like that Tony Robbins quote I heard once where he said, your business will eat every dollar you feed it. Basically, like, you're going to put 50 G's in, it'll find a way to spend it. Well, our staff meetings will eat every minute we give to it, regardless of how small our agenda is. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but we don't have a hard time covering topics. We actually, at this point, and have for almost a year now, employ the same meeting notes model that you introduced to me in coaching and business for unicorns. So I run the done or not done kind of middle discussion third of the conversation, and then establishing of new action items concept with the team. We assign responsibilities to the team right out of a moving Google sheet that everybody lives in. And they like the accountability piece, and they crave the consistency in the meetings. And early on, it was kind of like, if the boss isn't going to be there, well, is there a meeting today at all? And when I'm not going to be there, they never miss the meeting. It's important to them. The team has kind of prioritized it. They like to, we kind of have a hierarchy. So we'd say second in command would run the meeting and keep the meeting notes. But I find that the team craves it and thrives with the structure of the weekly meeting. And it's worthy of note that we have salaried our entire team at this point. So it's kind of built into the understanding that this is part of your compensation. We have standing meetings. That's the entire team discussion. Then there's the side caveat. I try and meet with my individual employees every other week for 30 minutes. And that's a totally different approach and agenda, but I find that that's a sweet spot. Twice a month for about a half hour with each person in a one-on-one format. And with my number two in command, John, if I'm in the building, it's every day for what sometimes is hours of days, sometimes is 15 minutes. But that's kind of instinctual strategizing and planning and brain dumping, just because we're in the same place, we're thinking the same way about the same stuff. Let's talk through some things. So I know I gave you three different answers there, but but the one that speaks to our whole community in as far as listeners go is, I think a single 45-minute all hands meeting each week is very important for my operation.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And I love that you gave us multiple angles, because I think there are different kinds of meetings, there are different purposes. Quick follow-up question, Pete. When you do one-on-one meetings with any of your direct reports, how much or little structure do you bring to those conversations?
That's an interesting one. I asked them to bring the structure. So I think I might have said on here in the past, and I plan on talking about this a little bit at our retreat in March. The one-on-ones are about what I can do for the employee and not what the employee can do for my operation. Whereas the all hands is about how we as a whole are rowing in the same direction. But those biweekly one-on-ones are more centered on how are we rolling that snowball, building the snowman toward building a employee that I can't afford to retain, or that I can't necessarily continue to intellectually stimulate because they outgrow the role. Like I like to use those meetings to talk about how we can better position them to get the dream job. Because we all ask during the interview process, like, what's the dream job? What would you like to be doing 5 years from now? Well, we actually try and reverse engineer and execute on that in the biweekly meetings.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Yeah, so let me ask. So we've covered kind of two kinds of meetings already, just broadly speaking. So we covered some one-on-one direct report meetings and the pulse, either weekly or every other week we're talking about. And then we covered kind of team meetings, kind of all hands or groups of team meetings. The one that I would maybe add to this conversation, and maybe Fisher, you can talk a little bit about the approach at MFF, is kind of big picture, long-term planning meetings. Right. So not week meetings that happen every week or every month, but ones that are like kind of quarterly or annual. Can you just talk a little bit about how we think about those?
Yeah. So longtime listeners are perhaps feeling we're getting redundant about this. Can't this any harder? But in addition to the day-to-day keeping the trains running on time, fixing little problems as they come up, there is a pulse that is widely believed to be best done on a quarterly and annual basis to get big picture clarity on all of the things going on in the business, to make sure that everybody on your team has clarified their most important priorities for the next, call it 12, 13, 16 weeks, to decide what are the things we're going to be tracking on the path to this, to potentially figure out, move towards some sort of 12-week implementation plan of the quarterly, sometimes called rocks or projects. And this is very, very valuable because to some extent, this is from, I think, the business's perspective, this is analogous to working on the business and not in the business. And a lot of these ongoing developmental meetings, you're often working in the business because you're dealing with the things that are coming up. You're helping troubleshoot and work through things that are preventing the implementation of the plan on the path to the quarterly goal. And invariably, there's going to be a little bit of inherent reactiveness because you're in real time steering the ship as it's in the air, so to speak. Whereas the annual meeting is an opportunity for everybody to really step outside of the business, to organize their thoughts and do their very best thinking in a fresh way to collectively decide how are we going to move the business forward over the next 3 months based on what reality is at this particular moment, which is, of course, a moving target.
Yeah. Yeah, I think well said. And I think, for listeners, if there's one thing I want everyone to leave this conversation thinking about is, what is your approach to the meetings at all three levels, right? Do you take time once a year, once a quarter, to step outside the business, get that 10,000-foot view? Do you take time on a regular basis, whether it's weekly, biweekly, monthly, to come together as a team or different kinds of teams in your company, at your training gym, to like talk about the stuff that you work on together? And are you spending time building interpersonal connections and trust and relationships, working on individual performance? And I think if start somewhere, think about those three levels. Yeah. When it comes to, I would love to talk this a little bit more because I'm a big proponent of like every meeting needs some structure. Would either of you ever have a meeting that doesn't have any agenda? I'm just curious. I want someone to disagree with me.
The
I don't know that you will, but
yeah, the only thing I could maybe see value in, and I tried this for a year or two and it didn't work well for me at all, was if you're really just looking to invest in the individual relationship and you're really just committed to, and this is a little bit of a nuanced shift, so let me make sure I choose my words carefully around this. If you are really committed to having a personal relationship with everybody that works on your team and you don't see them a lot, that can be hard to do. So for instance, in Mark Fisher Fitness, as the years have gone by, we've routinely had as many as 25, in excess of 25 people at a time on the team. And I felt for a long time, well, as the leader, I really want to have a personal relationship with everyone I work with. So I went through a period where I, well-intentioned, forced everybody to meet with me at least once every few months, and everybody well-intentionally, good-naturedly chose to meet with me. And sometimes there was good information that came out of it, but I think the lack of structure didn't serve those meetings because we were both sort of like, well, I guess we hang out now. And it was nice and we talked about stuff. And I think most people appreciated the intention behind it. I think most people were not terribly satisfied, but I can't say I was. And I think some people flat out didn't really like it because they, don't want to spend extra time with their boss if they don't have to. And I'm friendly enough, but now I'm taking time away from work for us just to talk. And, certainly there is, I think, a little bit of love languages in there. I think for some individuals, it's very important to them to have a personal relationship with people they work with. And if that's missing, it will actually impact their work in negative ways. And other individuals like working with people, but aren't trying to be friends with everyone they work with. So if you're taking them away from their job, even with a well-intentioned attempt to work on their friendship, that may not go well for you. So I guess I would say that my my only experience with that was not one I found particularly satisfying or successful.
Yeah. Any relevant experience there, Pete?
I think to me, this question is about understanding the difference between structure and objectives, because I've never scheduled a meeting myself where I didn't have objectives,
Mm-hmm.
but I have absolutely scheduled those same meetings and not come in with a plan for how I want to communicate them to the
Mm-hmm.
person I'm meeting with. In
Yep.
my early stages, it was kind of like a brain dump. We'd walk in and I'd be like, all right, what do I want to cover? I wanted to talk to you about the schedule. All right, let's talk about that. And it just was never particularly productive. Whereas when I come in and I say, hey, quick look at the agenda, here's what we're going to do today. I just want to talk about these three things. Do you care what we start with? I think that is structure, structuring of objectives. And I just had a haphazard approach to delivering the same information in the past. But no, I've never had the let's just, you know, sit down on the couch and just see where this takes us. I always come in with a couple things in mind that I want to hit, and it seems it's kind of like right there aligned with being a good public speaker. I mean, you could go and deliver an hour of information to people, but if you didn't tell them loosely what's coming down the pipe, they're kind of like, "What are we getting here?" Whereas we all like to start with a pretty good outline of where we're headed, explain how we're going to get there, and then take them there, and then tell them where we went. That's how I run my meetings now.
Yeah, I think you put your finger right on it, Pete, which is that when I think about having meetings that have some structure, the minimum amount of structure I'm looking for is a purpose, right? Or an objective, right? That's like the minimum. I'm not saying everyone has to have a minute by minute agenda, right? Some do, right? Some need a minute by minute agenda, right? But at the very least, like the minimum amount of structure I'm willing to walk into any meeting is like, what's the goal here? What are we trying to accomplish? And I want to make sure everyone knows that in advance, because the kind of the stupidest feedback to get from a meeting is like, what am I even doing here?
Right.
Right? Like it's just such an avoidable piece of feedback to get as managers and leaders. It's like, well, if you didn't make that clear when you were scheduling this or setting this up, then that's a real missed opportunity. Go fix that right away. Why is everyone here? Why did you invite each person? And I know, Fisher, this is something we continue to dance around because sometimes we have meetings where we want everyone there, but we get into conversations that don't require them anymore. And we've played around with all kinds of tactics to say, okay, yeah, we want you at this weekly team meeting, but at any point where we get to a topic where are not needed, let's let you go. Let's, sometimes we call these like shrinkage meetings where we'll just kind of shrink down less and less people so that as few people as possible have moments in meeting where they're like, what the hell am I even doing here? Do you even need me? Because the minute they're a waste of time, you've kind of soured the soup.
Well, and I like that we have kind of that dynamic in place. You and I have a standing 30 minutes every week.
Yep.
And I'd say if we really look back, we average about 2.5 meetings a month because it's fairly common to fire off a text and say, hey, you got anything specific today? Or do we want to push? And rather than waste each other's time, not that I don't enjoy seeing your face and catching up a little bit, but sometimes you don't need the meeting. It doesn't mean it was a bad habit to establish some time and kind of know that you hold the right to push if you need to. And so that's probably one of the better habits that I've learned in kind of my weekly dialogue with you is that they don't have to happen. We don't have to mandate a meeting just because we said we were going to do the thing. Let's just force it. And so if I could give people advice, it's carve out the time and then respect each other enough to say, hey, doesn't seem like it's going to be productive today. Let's put this one on hold for another week. That never really disrupts anyone's schedule so long as you communicate clearly.
Yeah, 100%. I have one more thing I want to share, and then maybe we'll start to wrap it up. But this one point that I think I wrote an article, I don't know, forever ago on our Business for Unicorns blog about meetings. And one of the points I remember making in it was, I think one of the pillars of every successful meeting is you got to make it relevant that we're all here at the same time. You got to justify having us all be at the same place at the same time, whether that's virtual or in person, meaning that, and Mark and I are huge about this, that we don't do in meetings what we could do by email.
Right.
We don't do in meetings what we could do by text or some other form of communication. That when we're getting together, it's an expensive 30 minutes, an expensive hour to have all your team in place, to your point, Pete, especially if you're paying them for it, that I want to make sure that we're using the team in a way that justifies us all being in person. And I think sometimes that requires some advanced planning, right? How am I going to structure the way we all contribute? Right? Are we all going to do some brainstorming? Are we all going to do breakout rooms? Are we going to use a whiteboard? Are we going to, use chat box, whatever it is? So I want to make a pitch for that to our listeners, is that, like, yes, it has to have a purpose. And if there's any structure I want you to think about, is how are you going to make this conversation valuable enough that it justifies having everyone at the same place at the same time? Is that making sense?
Totally
Yes.
agree.
Yeah. All right.
And
Well,
I throw one piece of advice out there as well, because I am a proponent of the somewhat ambiguous meeting in the biweeklies with my staff, just because I want them to kind of do some thinking in front of me. But that spins out of control very quickly if I let it. Like a 30-minute meeting can really easily become an hour and a half if we're talking about kind of dreams and goals. And so I do actually take kind of a hardline approach. And we have this application that I've used over the years, my wife and I, with timeouts with our kids. And like they do better with timeouts when we would conceptualize it and be like 5 minutes, and it would show a countdown, like a pie chart type deal. And I started using that on meetings where I knew we were going to be a little bit ambiguous on where we were headed. I'd sit down and I'd be like, look, I know this could go a lot of different ways. I got 30 minutes for this. I set it right there on the desk. I'm like, when we run out of pie chart there, we're out of time. So let's just chat. And it's never anyone being like, Pete's being fiercely protective of his time or anything like that. It's just a mutual understanding that this is what we're working with. And it really helps. We never fail to finish on time, and nobody gets their feelings hurt. So it could be something, if you find that you have a hard time locking it in and just getting to those objectives, that visual cue can make a difference.
Yeah, that's amazing, Pete. I love that. It's a kind of structure for a kind of conversation. The purpose of the conversation is like, we're just going to connect and talk, and I want to hear how you think. And the way I'm going to add structure to this is we got 20 minutes. Right? I think that's so smart. All right, dudes. Anything else you want to share about meetings we didn't get to cover? I feel like there's a lot more we can say, but I feel like this is a pretty good overview.
This was a good overview. Yeah, it's amazing how many things there are to cover on this topic. It's seems to me that this is how the work gets done in most organizations, particularly when you're talking about how you develop the people that you work with. It's happening through meetings that are not just confirmation and information transfer, but the actual developing, the coaching of individuals. And if it's not something you're currently doing with some regular pulse with the people that you work with, you should start immediately.
Yeah, 100%. Well said, my friend. All right, listeners. Well, if this was a valuable podcast for you, please share it with your friends and comment below. What do you do with your meetings in your business? Tell us about it. Also, share down below, what else would you like us to talk about in this podcast? You can also email each of us, Michael, Mark, Pete, at businessforunicorns.com, separately, not all together, because that will go nowhere. And we'll talk to you on the next one. Thanks so much, gents. Have a good day.
Good meeting.
Well, I hope you loved today's podcast, and forgive me, I want to remind you one more time, if you haven't already done so, head over to businessforunicorns.com, click the button, and get your free self-assessment, the ultimate training gym owner report card. I promise you're going to want to dig into this resource and get the support you need, finding crystal clarity on exactly where you need to be focusing to create a life and a business you love.